"Look closely. Not everything buried here is dead." That whisper pierced right into my ear, just as my husband's casket was being lowered into the grave. The one who said it was Grace, my daughter-in-law. Her eyes were red, her body trembling, yet her voice was cold, sharp, cutting into my heart like a blade. I froze. For 50 years of marriage, David had been my flawless image of a man, a devoted husband, a caring father, a pillar admired by all, and today, before hundreds of relatives and friends, he was being laid to rest amid sobs and solemn prayers. But in that sacred moment, Grace planted a horrifying doubt deep inside me. I looked around, white wreaths, sorrowful faces, whispered prayers. But beneath that silence, could there be a darker truth waiting to surface? Why did Grace choose this very moment to say it? And what exactly did she mean by "not everything buried"? My hands trembled as I clutched the Bible tighter. Part of me wanted to dismiss her words as grief, but another part couldn't stop following her gaze, eyes that seemed to say, "If you dare to face it, nothing will ever be the same again." And she was right. Because what I discovered after the funeral was far more terrifying than anything I had ever imagined. My name is Beatrice. I have just turned 70. People call me a fortunate woman. A strong home, a marriage of more than half a century, a successful son, and what looked like a perfect family. But standing before my husband's coffin, I suddenly felt an emptiness so vast I couldn't even name it. And Grace's whisper kept echoing, like a shard of glass slicing into my memory. Memories. They pulled me back to my youth. It was 1968 when I met David during a church service. He was tall, with deep-set eyes and a calm smile. At that time, I was an 18-year-old girl, my hands still dusted with chalk from the classroom. David was nothing like other young men, polished, mature, and a patient listener. I believed I had found my safe harbor. We married just a year later. In those early days, David took care of me with the smallest details. Every morning, he left hot coffee on the table, kissed my forehead, then went to work. I was certain he was the greatest gift God had ever given me. When our only son, Andrew, was born, I believed even more firmly that our happiness was eternal. I remember one evening when Andrew was about 7, he asked me, "Mom, why is Dad always so busy? Does he even love us?" I smiled and stroked his hair. "Your father loves us more than you can imagine. One day, you'll understand." But even as I said it, my chest ached. David was indeed busy, always late. Yet I told myself that was the duty of a responsible man. I never allowed myself to question. I even boasted, "My husband is the most wonderful man." Time passed, and those years still looked like a beautiful painting. Family dinners, Andrew's laughter echoing through the house, David quietly reading his newspaper after meals. But now, when I stare at that picture, I can't help but wonder, were there shadows I chose not to see? As the years went by, I lived believing I was the happiest wife alive. David rose higher and higher in his career, admired by colleagues, respected by everyone. His trips away from home became more frequent, his absences longer. But whenever he returned, he carried gifts for Andrew and hugged me tightly, as if trying to make up for all the time he was gone. I remember one summer, Andrew had just turned 15. He stood at the front porch, angry and frustrated, and shouted, "Mom, Dad is never here. He loves his job more than he loves us." I gently tapped his shoulder, scolding him but with affection. "Don't ever say that. Your father sacrifices so we can have a better life. One day you'll understand." Andrew fell silent, yet in his eyes I caught a flash of sadness. Back then, I thought it was just teenage rebellion. I didn't realize that the distance between him and his father was slowly turning into something much worse. As for me, I kept living inside the shimmering shell of being the ideal wife. I joined the women's fellowship at church, did charity work, cared for the household. People whispered, Beatrice is so lucky, such a successful husband, such a picture-perfect family. And I believed them. Each time I stood by the window, watching David's car pull away, I smiled and silently prayed, Lord, keep him safe. Let this family of mine stay unshaken. But now, looking back, those details feel like cracks in a mirror. Why did I never question his late nights? Why did I ignore those odd expenses I once glimpsed in his paperwork? Why did I excuse Andrew's coldness, thinking it was just his personality? The funeral was over, yet Grace's whisper haunted me still. Look closely. I thought I had looked, but maybe I had never truly seen, and I had no idea that after that funeral, the veil of lies would begin to tear apart piece by piece, revealing a truth so merciless that I sometimes wished I had never learned it. After the funeral, the house felt unbearably empty. Alone, I began sorting through David's belongings, his shirts that still carried the faint scent of his cologne, his journals with neat handwriting. I thought I could find comfort in the remnants of warm memories. But as I opened a drawer in his wooden cabinet, a stack of papers slipped out. Bank statements. My heart tightened. The numbers didn't match what I had always known. I thought our savings were only a few $100,000. Yet these documents showed large sums withdrawn every month, stretching back years. Where had the money gone? Why hadn't I known? With trembling hands, I took the statements to Andrew. My son looked uneasy for a moment, then forced a thin smile. Mom, Dad had his reasons. He was taking care of the family. Don't worry about it. His answer was too neat, too practiced. When I tried to look him in the eye, he turned away just like David always did whenever I asked about his work. That night, Grace approached me. She didn't cry. She didn't offer comfort. Instead, she placed her cold hand on my shoulder and whispered, Mom, this is only the beginning. David wasn't the man you thought he was. Fear swept through me. I wanted to deny it, but Grace's grip tightened, her eyes unwavering. Then she pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of a hotel receipt dated the same night David had told me he was away on a business trip. My heart shattered. I told myself it must be a mistake. But then Grace revealed more receipts, one after another, David's name and signature printed clearly across each one. There was no room left for denial. That night I sat alone in the dark living room, listening to the clock tick. I remembered all the late nights David came home, the surprise gifts, the gentle smile he gave me when I asked too many questions. Was it all just a performance? By dawn, I realized I was standing at a terrible crossroad. Either keep my eyes shut or finally face the darkness Grace had begun to unveil. And I knew this was only the first crack. More secrets, far more devastating, were waiting to come to light. I couldn't sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw those hotel receipts, David's signature staring back at me. The next morning, I made a decision I had never dared to before I opened the drawer David had always kept locked. For decades, I had respected his privacy. But now, my trust was gone. Inside, I found a small wooden box tied with a silver ribbon. My hands shook as I untied it. Inside were old letters, the paper yellowed with age, the handwriting soft, feminine. I picked one up and began to read. David, I waited for you in room 302. You promised that this time you would leave everything behind so we could finally be together. My knees nearly gave out. All these years, I believed David was faithful. Even when I was in the hospital, even after I gave birth to Andrew, he had been writing to another woman. Grace quietly stepped into the room and saw me clutching the letters. She didn't gloat, didn't say, "I told you so." She simply sighed and whispered, "Mom, the truth never dies. It only waits for the day it surfaces." Tears blurred the ink on the page. My mind replayed all those nights David came home late, claiming meetings had run over. I remembered how I warmed his dinner, how I massaged his stiff shoulders, how I trusted his tired smile while all along he may have just returned from another woman's arms. When I confronted Andrew about the letters, he didn't look surprised. Instead, he frowned and said coldly, "Mom, the past should stay buried. Dad was a great man. Stop digging it up." His words cut me deeper than the letters themselves. Did Andrew already know? Had he chosen silence all these years? That night, Grace confessed something that froze my blood. Years ago, she had once seen David leaving a hotel with a strange woman. She never told anyone, afraid the family would collapse. But now, with all the evidence, she couldn't let me keep living in illusion. I sat there, trembling, my world collapsing piece by piece. The man I had loved and respected for half a century was nothing more than a mirage, carefully constructed on lies. If David were still alive, I would have looked into his eyes and asked, "All those years, did you ever truly love me?" But David was now 6 feet under, and only the shattered remains of the truth remained, pulling me toward an even darker abyss. One evening, I heard sobs coming from the kitchen. When I stepped in, I found Grace huddled in a corner, her face swollen from crying. Before I could ask what was wrong, Andrew stormed in, his voice sharp with anger. "Mom, stay out of my marriage!" I froze. In my memory, Andrew had always been the gentle boy who hid behind me when other kids bullied him. But now, his eyes burned red, his voice carrying the same harshness David had whenever he lost his temper. Through her tears, Grace whispered, "Mom, he isn't just cold. He's been hiding debts from me. I can't take it anymore." My heart pounded as I turned to Andrew. "Is this true? Did you lie to your wife?" "You're becoming exactly like your father." He stayed silent, then smirked bitterly. "Mom, Dad was a successful man. He taught me that real men must have secrets, must know how to hide things to maintain control. If you don't understand that, don't judge me." The words pierced me like a knife. For years, I believed I had raised Andrew to be decent, honest, but instead, David had passed down a legacy of lies and cruelty. Grace pulled out a stack of photocopied documents with trembling hands, credit card bills, high-interest loans, all under Andrew's name. My stomach twisted as I recognized one signature in particular, David's. He had co-signed one of Andrew's largest debts. I sank into a chair as the puzzle pieces fell into place. David hadn't just betrayed me with another woman. He had also enabled Andrew, paving the way for him to repeat the same mistakes. Grace's voice broke through the silence, soft but resolute. "Mom, if we don't stop him now, Andrew will destroy everything, not just his marriage, but your name as well." In that cramped kitchen, my heartbeat thundered in my ears. My husband had betrayed me, and now my only son was turning into his mirror image. Everything I had once trusted, everything I had once been proud of, was collapsing right before my eyes. And in that moment, I finally understood what Grace had whispered at the funeral. The truth never dies. It only waits to rise. I had been clinging to a fragile hope that perhaps all of this was some misunderstanding. But then Grace brought me the final piece of proof, cold and merciless. One evening, she called me into her room and handed me a small USB drive. Her voice was hoarse, almost breaking. "Mom, I've kept this for years. I didn't want you to suffer, but now, you need to know." My hands trembled as I plugged it into the laptop. The screen flickered, and a grainy video appeared. It had been recorded secretly in a hotel parking lot. And there he was, David. His familiar suit, his familiar gait, his arm wrapped tightly around a young woman as he led her inside. I stopped breathing. There was nothing left to defend, nothing left to explain away. It was him, my husband of 50 years, the man I had trusted with my whole life. A sob tore out of me as I covered my face with my hands. All those years, I had worshipped a mirage. Grace sat beside me, her grip firm around my cold, shaking hand. She whispered, "David betrayed you, Mom. And Andrew. He's walking the same path. But I refuse to let silence consume me the way it consumed you. I need you to stand with me." I lifted my tear-blurred eyes, staring at Grace's determined face. Inside me, grief twisted into something sharper, anger. Not only because David had betrayed me, but because he had left behind a poisonous legacy for our son. And that legacy was growing darker with each day. The final blow came not from Grace, but from someone I least expected. The day after the video, a knock echoed at my door. It was Margaret, our longtime neighbor, her hands trembling as she held a thick envelope. Her voice quavered, "Beatrice, I've kept this secret far too long. But now, you need to know. David wasn't with just one woman. I saw him bring others, many times, to an apartment he kept across town. I saw it with my own eyes." My knees weakened. With shaking fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside were photographs David's arm around different women, taken over the span of years. Some were blurry, some clearer, but there was no mistaking him. His face, his posture, his smile. Each photo felt like a hammer striking my chest, blow after blow, until my tears dried up and I was left hollow, trembling in silence. I stood frozen for a long time. When the grief finally settled, it wasn't grief anymore. It was rage deep, simmering, relentless. That night, as I sat in the dark, I heard Andrew shouting at Grace in the next room. His voice was sharp, cruel, commanding. He slammed the door as he stormed out, leaving Grace in tears. And it struck me. David may have been buried in the ground, but his shadow still lived on in Andrew. Grace came to me, her eyes red but fierce with resolve. She whispered, "Mom, we can't let this continue. This isn't just a family secret anymore. It's a battle." For the first time in decades, I stopped being the obedient wife, the silent mother. I looked into her eyes and squeezed her hand. I knew then nothing would ever be quiet again, and I was ready to fight. The funeral had passed, but its shadow still weighed heavy on me. Secrets, letters, receipts, they burned in my chest, urging me to act. And the first chance came quickly, a family gathering at church, where relatives had assembled to pray for David's soul. The atmosphere was solemn. People dressed neatly, reciting prayers in unison. Andrew sat in the front pew, his posture proud, as if he were stepping into his father's place of honor. I looked at him, bitterness rising inside me, his eyes, his smirk. It was like staring at David's ghost. When it was Grace's turn to speak, I expected a few polite words of remembrance. Instead, her voice shook, but her tone carried a boldness that silenced the room. "My father-in-law was not the man everyone imagined. He left behind more pain than any of you think, and Andrew is following that same path." Gasps filled the sanctuary. Whispers spread like wildfire. Andrew shot to his feet, his face red, his voice seething. "Grace, shut your mouth. This is holy ground. Are you trying to shame our family in front of everyone?" My own body trembled as I rose, clutching the Bible to my chest. In all my life, I had never openly defied my husband or my son. But this time was different. My voice, though shaky, rang out. "Andrew, enough. Do you think I don't know? Do you think your father was perfect? Do you intend to repeat all his mistakes in front of everyone here?" The room erupted in murmurs. Shock, confusion. Some gasped, some frowned, others exchanged uneasy glances. Andrew's eyes widened in disbelief, as though he couldn't fathom his own mother standing against him. His voice dropped to a growl. "Mother, you're betraying Dad. You're betraying me." I met his stare head-on, unflinching for the first time. "No, Andrew. I am finally seeing clearly just as Grace told me to. And what I see is your father's blood running in your veins, not as something to be proud of, but as a stain. The sanctuary quaked with whispers. Someone muttered, "My God, could it be true about David?" Andrew clenched his fists, his face twisted with rage. But with all eyes on him, he could do nothing but storm out, slamming the church doors behind him. Grace reached for my hand, whispering through trembling lips, "Mom, from this moment on, we are at war." The moment the doors closed, the room buzzed like a hive struck open. Whispers, suspicion, judgment, all eyes turned to me and Grace. My heart pounded in my chest, but I knew there was no turning back now. Moments later, Andrew returned. His face was flushed with fury, but this time he carried a stack of papers. He lifted them high and declared loudly, "Everyone, don't believe their slander. Here is my father's will. It states clearly that he entrusted everything to me, his only son. If my father had betrayed this family, would he have left all his wealth in my hands?" The room shifted again, some nodding, some whispering doubt. I saw it in their eyes. Faith wavering, Andrew pulling them back toward him. Grace's grip on my hand tightened. She stepped forward, her voice ringing with determination. "And do you know why?" "Because you and your father covered up his debts together. David guaranteed your loans, Andrew. Don't think I don't know." Her words cracked the air like thunder. The sanctuary froze. All eyes turned to Andrew. His face contorted in anger and panic. He shouted, desperate, "Shut up! You're nothing but an outsider! You have no right to speak here!" But Grace didn't waver. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "I am your wife, the one who has witnessed your lies, your debts, your betrayals. Today, I will not let you hide anymore." The atmosphere shifted again. Suspicion now fell on Andrew. The whispers rose. Debts? Guaranteed loans? Oh, Lord. Andrew's forehead gleamed with sweat. He looked at me, silently begging for me to stand by him, as I had always done. But this time I shook my head, and I said, clear enough for all to hear, "Andrew, your father deceived me for decades, and now you deceive your wife and everyone here. Today, I choose the truth." The sanctuary fell silent. Andrew's body stiffened. Then, in a fit of rage, he slammed the will onto the altar and growled through his teeth, "You've betrayed this family, Mother, and you will pay for it." He stormed out once more. But this time, I knew it wasn't an empty threat. It was a promise, and our war had only just begun. I thought Andrew had left for good, but minutes later he stormed back into the church, his face still flushed with rage, but now with something clenched tightly in his hand. This time, he carried a weapon of his own, a stack of glossy photographs. With a sneer, he tossed them onto the long table in front of the relatives. His voice rang out, sharp and triumphant. "Look, everyone! This is proof that Grace has deceived us all. She is not the loyal wife she pretends to be." Gasps rippled through the room. Curious hands reached for the photos. I picked one up. My breath caught. It showed Grace sitting across from a man at a cafe, her boss. I recognized him from earlier photos, leaning in close, mid-conversation. The camera angle was suggestive, the framing designed to stir suspicion. Whispers erupted. Could it be true? Beatrice's daughter-in-law? My God! Grace's face drained of color. She leapt to her feet, her voice trembling with fury. "That's my boss! It was a work meeting. Andrew hired someone to follow me and twist the photos to make it look like something else." Andrew smirked coldly, turning to the relatives. "Tell me, does a faithful wife meet another man like this, in secret? She accused me of lying, but this is who she really is." The sanctuary turned tense, suffocating. Some shook their heads. Others exchanged skeptical glances. I watched my daughter-in-law's hands tremble, her eyes glistening with tears, but her gaze was clear. She turned to me, her voice breaking like a plea. "Mom, please believe me. I have never betrayed this family. I only wanted to protect you, to protect the truth." I looked straight into her eyes, and I knew. I had been a mother long enough to recognize when a gaze was honest. I rose, my voice cutting through the buzzing whispers. "Enough, Andrew. You are fabricating lies just as your father once did. The truth cannot be buried. You can smear your wife's name, but you cannot erase what I have seen with my own eyes." Some of the relatives nodded slowly, murmurs shifting. Strange. How did Andrew have those photos ready so quickly? Maybe he staged this. Andrew's face burned crimson. His rage trembled beneath his skin. But he knew the more he protested, the more it would unravel him. He hurled the photographs to the ground and shouted, "Fine! If you've chosen her over me, then you're no longer my mother. From now on, we have nothing to say to each other." And with that, he stormed out again, his footsteps echoing down the church hall. The heavy doors slammed behind him, leaving only silence. I stood there, clutching Grace's trembling hand. My heart shook, but I knew the conflict was no longer hidden. It was out in the open. There would be no turning back. A few days after the confrontation at the church, I thought Andrew might lie low. But instead, he returned with something far more dangerous: the law. One morning, I received a letter from a law office. It was an official summons to attend the reading of David's will. My chest tightened as I held the paper. For decades, I had never cared about money. I trusted David to provide. But now, that trust felt like a blade pressed against my throat. The law office was tense, the air heavy. Andrew sat across from me, his face cold, his eyes filled with defiance. Beside him was his own lawyer, a young man with sharp features, clearly hired to protect Andrew's interests. Grace sat next to me, her hand gripping mine, steadying me. The executor of the will adjusted his glasses and began to read in a calm, even tone, yet every word fell like thunder in my heart. According to the will, all real estate holdings, bank accounts, and company shares will be transferred to Andrew, the only son. The legal wife, Mrs. Beatrice, will receive only a fixed monthly allowance for personal expenses. I went numb. My whole life as a wife, I thought David and I were one. Yet here, in black and white, I had been reduced to a stipend discarded with cold finality. Across from me, Andrew leaned back in his chair, a triumphant smile tugging at his lips. Grace shot up, her voice shaking but fierce. "This can't be! David hid the truth. He co-signed Andrew's debts and drained the family funds. We have documents to prove it. This will doesn't reflect the reality of his actions." Andrew's lawyer smirked, his words sharp. "Whatever documents you claim to have are irrelevant if the will is legally binding. Mrs. Beatrice will get her allowance, and everything else belongs to Andrew." The room fell into heavy silence. My blood roared in my ears. My hands trembled. This wasn't just about money. It was David's final betrayal, the last knife he left behind. Andrew leaned toward me, his voice low but dripping with venom. "Mother, you have nothing now. Stay quiet, or you'll only humiliate yourself further." I looked him straight in the eye, and for the first time, I saw no trace of the little boy who once asked, "Does Dad love us?" What stared back at me was greed, ruthlessness, David's shadow reborn. And in that moment, I knew, if I didn't fight back, I would lose not just the inheritance, but my voice, my dignity, everything. The executor shuffled the papers. Andrew sat tall, as though victory was already sealed. But Grace wasn't finished. With a sudden, resolute motion, she placed a thick folder on the table. Her voice rang steady. "These are the bank statements and debt documents under Andrew's name, with David's signature as guarantor. If David truly trusted Andrew unconditionally, why did he conceal this debt and siphon money from the joint account?" The executor froze, leaning forward to inspect the documents. The room stirred with murmurs. Andrew's jaw tightened, his fists clenched. Every page was undeniable figures, dates, signatures. The truth lay there in ink. Grace's voice cut through, sharper now. This will has no moral weight when it was written under the shadow of deception. If necessary, we will take these documents to court. For the first time, Andrew's smug mask cracked, and I realized he had just been forced one step back. Andrew wasn't ready to concede. I could see the fury simmering in his eyes, but he quickly masked it with arrogance. He stood, straightening his suit jacket, and sneered. So what if there were debts? My father was still the master of his estate. If he wanted to leave everything to me, no one can change that. As for the debts, you're too late. I've already paid them off. They're gone. His young lawyer immediately slid another file onto the table with a flourish. Here are the clearance certificates. All loans have been settled. There are no outstanding obligations. Legally, Andrew's claim remains intact. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some of the onlookers began to nod, as if the balance was tipping back toward Andrew's favor. I felt Grace's hand tremble slightly in mine, but only for a moment. Her eyes hardened with determination. Without a word, she pulled a large yellow envelope from her bag and laid it flat on the table. Her voice rang, calm yet razor-sharp. If those debts were paid, then why has this finance company continued sending collection notices in the last 3 months? These are the originals, each one stamped with a red seal. She spread the papers out across the polished table, pages upon pages of overdue notices, clear amounts, active deadlines. Not one, but several. The executor of the will leaned forward, his brow furrowing as he examined the documents. These seals, these are legitimate, and the dates are current. If these debts remain active, then Andrew's testimony is inconsistent. A sharp gasp cut through the room. All eyes turned back to Andrew. He lunged forward, snatching the papers from the table. His voice cracked with desperation. Lies! These are forged! Grace, you're trying to ruin me! But it was too late. Everyone had already seen. I looked at my son, his shoulders rigid, his hands trembling, and my heart twisted with pain. But my voice came out steady, almost cold. Andrew, your father left you not only his fortune, but also his ruin. Instead of breaking the cycle, you chose to follow him deceit for deceit, destruction for destruction. His face contorted with rage. His voice dropped to a hiss. Mother, you will regret standing against me. Then he shoved his chair back violently, storming out of the room. The young lawyer scrambled after him, but the damage was done. Grace sat down slowly beside me, her eyes glimmering with fierce resolve. Mom, he knows now. We have the truth, and if it comes to it, the law will be on our side. I squeezed her hand, feeling a strange new strength surge through me. For the first time in my life, I was no longer the obedient wife or the silent mother. I had just become a fighter. The news spread faster than I ever imagined. Within days of the chaotic will reading, the entire neighborhood buzzed with whispers. I couldn't even step outside to buy bread without hearing fragments behind my back. Beatrice was deceived by her husband her whole life, and now by her son. Andrew's drowning in debt, yet he still tried to grab everything. All my life I had guarded the family's honor like a treasure, and now it was shattering in front of the world. But the gossip was only the beginning. One morning, Grace walked into the living room, her eyes wide, a folded newspaper trembling in her hands. Mom, they've written about us. On the front page of the local paper, the headline screamed, "A once respected family, now drowning in debt and inheritance scandal." Beneath it was David's portrait in his fine suit, beside the chilling caption, "The truth behind the perfect façade." I sank into my chair, my chest tightening. The world now knew. The secrets I had hidden inside our home had been torn open for everyone to see. Andrew, on the other hand, reacted like a beast cornered. He barged into my house, slamming the table so hard the glasses rattled. His face was twisted with rage. "Grace, you did this. You leaked everything. You want to destroy me, don't you?" Grace didn't flinch. She stood tall, her voice steady, her eyes blazing. "I didn't leak anything, but the truth can't stay buried forever. People are only writing what you've already done." Andrew's face turned crimson. He swung toward me, his eyes full of accusation, his voice shaking with hate. "Mother, if you side with her, you're tearing this family apart with your own hands." I drew in a deep breath. And in that moment, I realized what Andrew called family was nothing more than a façade of lies, a mask David and Andrew had worn for years. My voice came out clear, steady, unwavering. "No, Andrew. Family is not lies and cover-ups. Family is truth. Family is respect. And you've lost all of it." He glared at me with such venom it chilled me to my bones. Then with a violent motion, he stormed out again. But I knew he wasn't done. He would never stop. And the next storm would be far worse. Just a week later, the real storm hit. This time, it wasn't just whispers in the street or a headline buried in the local paper. Reporters gathered outside my gate, their microphones, cameras, and flashing bulbs pointed straight at my door. "Mrs. Beatrice, is it true your husband had affairs and hid massive debts? Is Andrew really trying to seize the entire estate?" Their questions came at me like gunfire, leaving me breathless. Never in my 70 years had I imagined being at the center of such a spectacle, and then Andrew appeared. He stepped out in a crisp suit, wearing a forced smile. He spread his arms wide as if he were still in control, his voice sugary smooth. "Please don't believe these malicious rumors. My father was a model man. My family is only being slandered by people trying to humiliate us." He tried to play the role of the noble son, but Grace was ready. She stepped forward, holding up a thick file of photocopied documents. Her voice rang, clear and sharp. "These are the debt papers, the guarantees with David's signature. This is not rumor, it's the truth. And if necessary, I'll take these to court." The crowd erupted. Cameras clicked furiously. Some reporters immediately shifted, peppering Andrew with questions about the debts and the will. His face drained of color, his smile frozen. Then, out of nowhere, Margaret, our elderly neighbor, stepped into the throng. Her voice shook, but her words cut through the chaos. "I was there. I saw David bring women to his rented apartment again and again. Beatrice isn't lying." A collective gasp rippled through the press. Andrew roared, lunging toward her. "You crazy old woman! Grace must have paid you to say this." The microphones caught every word. Reporters seized on it instantly. "Andrew, did you just call a witness a crazy old woman? What do you mean by that?" His composure cracked. Sweat poured down his temples as the crowd closed in with questions. Around us, neighbors shook their heads in disappointment. The shining image of the noble heir shattered before my eyes. I stood beside Grace, my hands trembling, but my voice strong. "If the truth shames my family, it is not our fault. It is the price of lies buried too long." Cameras flashed, the light searing, relentless. And in those flashes, I realized the battle had left the walls of my home. It had become a war before the entire world. And Andrew, rather than humiliating Grace and me, was now the one being judged, in broad daylight. The media storm didn't stop at my front gate. Within days, newspapers across the city carried headlines about us. Local television even aired a special segment titled, "David, Model Husband, or Master of Deception." But the hardest blow landed squarely on Andrew. The company where he served as chief financial officer called an emergency meeting. Shareholders demanded answers. Why was his name plastered across news reports about debts, scandals, and a contested will? A financial journal released an exposé detailing every outstanding credit card balance, every loan Andrew had accumulated. Overnight, he became a public joke. Colleagues avoided him. Old friends quietly cut ties. His phone buzzed constantly, not with support, but with threats from creditors. Grace showed me a video that went viral on social media. Andrew, leaving his office, was swarmed by reporters. He held his briefcase like a shield, his voice hoarse with anger as he shouted, "Get out of my way! I have nothing to say!" Within hours, the clip was cut, edited, and mocked across the internet. People laughed, the great heir reduced to running from questions. That night, Andrew stormed into my home, his eyes bloodshot, his face gaunt. He slammed the door so hard the walls shook. "Mother! You let Grace destroy me! If you won't stand by me, I'll lose everything!" I looked at him calmly, though my heart broke at the sight of the boy I once cradled, now twisted into a bitter shadow. "No, Andrew, you're not losing everything because of Grace. You're losing everything because you chose to live a lie, just like your father." Grace quietly set a stack of printed news articles on the table. Each headline screamed his disgrace. None of it was fabricated. They were all reflections of the truth, finally breaking through. Andrew ripped the pages apart, his hands shaking. His scream rattled the air. "You'll pay for this! I'll drag you and Grace into court, and I'll make everyone see you're the liars, not me." Then he stormed out, the door slamming so violently it rattled the frame. I stood frozen, my chest tight with dread. I knew then, the next battle wouldn't be against whispers or headlines. It would be fought in the courtroom. The day of the trial dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself carried the weight of what was about to unfold. When I entered the courtroom, every seat was filled. Relatives, neighbors, reporters, even strangers curious to witness the fall of a once proud family. The air buzzed with anticipation, sharp as static. Andrew sat across from me, dressed in a suit, his face hollow but his posture rigid. His private lawyer leaned close, whispering frantically. Andrew didn't look at me once his eyes were locked on the stack of papers before him, as if they could shield him from what was coming. The judge struck his gavel, his voice deep and steady. "The court is now in session in the matter of the inheritance dispute between Mrs. Beatrice and her son, Andrew." Andrew's lawyer wasted no time. He rose, his tone sharp and aggressive. "Your Honor, the will is perfectly valid. David left everything to his only son, Andrew. Allegations of infidelity or debt are irrelevant mere speculation, with no legal bearing." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. I saw Andrew lift his chin slightly, a smirk tugging at his lips, but then my lawyer, an older man with calm eyes and a measured voice, stood. He placed a thick file on the podium, his words deliberate, unwavering. "We have bank records, loan documents, and guarantees signed by David himself. These are not rumors. And we also have eyewitness testimony of David's affairs, proof that he lived a life of deception, the very deception Andrew now seeks to continue." Gasps filled the room. Andrew leapt to his feet, pounding the table. Lies! All of it lies! You're trying to rob me of what's mine!" The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order in the court! Mr. Andrew, sit down at once!" Andrew dropped back into his seat, his face pale, beads of sweat forming at his temple. I watched him, my heart aching. Never in my darkest dreams had I imagined facing my own son as an adversary in court. Beside me, Grace placed her hand gently over mine, her voice a whisper of steel. "Mom, today justice will speak." I drew in a deep breath. For the first time, I wasn't the trembling wife or the silent mother. I was a witness to the truth, and I would speak it. The judge signaled for the first witness. All eyes turned as the doors opened, and Margaret, our elderly neighbor, shuffled in with trembling hands but steady eyes. My lawyer asked softly, "Mrs. Margaret, can you tell the court what you witnessed?" Her voice shook at first, then grew stronger. "I saw David. Many times. He brought women into a rented apartment a few streets away. At first I thought it was business, but when I saw how close they were, I knew. He betrayed his wife. And once I saw Andrew there, standing outside the apartment, accepting an envelope from his father. The courtroom erupted. People whispered, gasped, some even shouted in disbelief. Andrew shot to his feet again, his voice a furious roar. "She's lying, just a senile old woman. Her word means nothing." The judge's gavel struck hard. "One more insult, Andrew, and you will be removed from this courtroom." Andrew froze, his face crimson, his fists clenched. He sank back into his chair, shaking with rage. Then came the video. My lawyer submitted the USB. On the screen, a grainy video played David, unmistakably in his tailored suit, wrapping his arms around a young woman in a hotel parking lot before leading her inside. Andrew exploded. "That's not my father." "That video could have been edited," but my lawyer remained calm. "Your Honor, this footage has been examined by a forensic expert. It is authentic. No sign of tampering." A stunned silence filled the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked. I sat still, my hands clasped together, my chest tight with both sorrow and vindication. After decades of blind faith, the truth was finally undeniable. The judge's voice rang out. "These documents and testimonies will be entered into the record. The court will now proceed to question Andrew regarding the debts." Andrew sat stiff, his knuckles white, his gaze darting wildly around the courtroom. He looked less like a confident heir and more like a cornered man with no escape. Grace leaned toward me, her whisper firm, resolute. "Mom, he's being pushed to the edge. This is only the beginning." I nodded slowly, my eyes fixed on my son's trembling back. And in that moment, I felt both sorrow and fury for the boy I raised, now lost, and for the man he had chosen to become. The air inside the courtroom grew suffocating, as if every soul present was holding their breath. The judge demanded an explanation for the debts. My lawyer laid a thick stack of files onto the bench. These are the complete credit records, the guarantees bearing David's signature, and confirmation letters from the bank. The loans have not been cleared. Andrew not only concealed them from his wife, but also exploited the will to secure unjust gain. Andrew shot up, his face blazing red. "That's a lie. I already paid them. The bank just hasn't updated the records yet." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Do you have official proof of repayment?" Silence. Andrew turned desperately to his lawyer, but the young man only bowed his head, lips pressed shut. Murmurs rose all around us. I watched Andrew's hands shake, his body rigid with fear. My son, the boy who once clung to me as a child, terrified of the dark, now stood exposed, lying, cornered, unraveling. The gavel struck with finality. This court finds, while the will itself remains legally valid, new evidence of debt and concealment alters the inheritance rights. Mrs. Beatrice is to receive her rightful share of the estate. All outstanding debts under Andrew's name are his sole responsibility. The gallery erupted gasps, whispers, even sighs of relief. Grace gripped my hand, her eyes shining with tears. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might break free from my chest. Andrew collapsed back into his chair, his face drained of all color. His lips quivered, his words broken, almost childlike. "No, no, this can't be. It's all mine. Father promised. Father promised me everything." The gavel fell once more. "This trial is adjourned. Justice has spoken." The sound echoed like thunder through the hall, reverberating inside me. I lifted my head and scanned the room. The same people who once whispered about me now stared with new eyes, not pity, but respect. Grace threw her arms around me, her voice trembling. "Mom, we did it. Not for the money, but because the truth has finally spoken." I closed my eyes, tears streaming freely down my cheeks. But they weren't bitter anymore. They were tears of release. David was gone. Andrew had lost everything. But I at long last had reclaimed justice for myself. After the verdict, Andrew was no longer the distinguished heir he once boasted of being. All he had left were debts. News of the ruling spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed across every paper. David's son, stripped of inheritance, crushed under debt. The company where he had served as CFO wasted no time. An official statement announced his suspension. Within days, he was dismissed entirely. Shareholders who once courted him now turned their backs without hesitation. A friend from church told me in hushed tones what happened as Andrew left the courthouse. A mob of creditors cornered him in front of reporters' cameras, demanding repayment. That image, his panicked face, drenched in sweat, in his expensive suit now looking like a cheap disguise, spread across social media within hours. Grace showed me the clips, people mocking him online, from executive to beggar poetic justice. Like father, like son finally paying the price. That night, Andrew stormed into my home once again. But this time, his face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot, his voice ragged. "Mother, Grace ruined me. You let her. If you don't stand with me now, I'll lose everything." I met his gaze, calm, but with sorrow burning deep inside. "No, Andrew, you lost everything because you chose deceit, just like your father." Grace placed a pile of newspapers and printed headlines on the table, every one of them about Andrew's disgrace. They weren't lies. They were truths, uncovered for the world to see. Andrew tore the papers apart with trembling hands, screaming, "You'll pay for this, both of you. I'll drag you to court again. I'll make the world believe you're the liars, not me." Then he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the house shook. Grace and I stood in silence, the echo still vibrating through the walls. And I knew the next chapter of this battle wouldn't be fought in whispers or newspapers. It would be fought in the cruel eyes of society itself. Andrew's downfall didn't end with the courtroom. It seeped into every corner of his life, tearing apart what little remained. He lost his job, his status, and soon his family. Grace, after years of enduring lies and cruelty, finally filed for divorce. The hearing was swift, almost merciless. With piles of evidence against him, debts, deceit, infidelity, there was no argument left for him to make. I still remember the look in Grace's eyes as she signed the papers, a mix of relief and sorrow. She had once loved him deeply, once tried to preserve their marriage for the sake of their children. But Andrew had burned every bridge. Andrew erupted in the courtroom, his voice hoarse, desperate. "You can't leave me. Everything you have is because of me." But no one stood with him. The judge's gavel came down. Grace was granted custody of the children. Andrew was left with nothing. After that day, I saw him wander aimlessly near my house, his eyes hollow, his body hunched like a man decades older. Once, when I opened the door, he muttered, "Mother, everyone's against me, even you." Then he staggered away without waiting for an answer. His old friends vanished. The same people who once crowded around him now avoided him like a plague. I overheard someone say bluntly, "Andrew destroyed himself. No one's going down with him." It pierced me like a knife. Grace and the children began a new life, away from his shadow. The house filled once more with the laughter of little ones. But Andrew, he drifted further into ruin. He was stripped of wealth, stripped of honor, stripped of family. All that remained was a bitter shell of the man he once pretended to be. And yet, I knew his collapse had not yet reached its end, because society can be far harsher than any judge. After losing everything, his job, his marriage, his children, Andrew slid into the abyss. He rented a filthy, crumbling room on the edge of the city. From luxury cars and fine suits, he now trudged on foot, sometimes riding the bus with his head bowed to avoid the stares. I heard whispers in the market. "Isn't that Andrew? The one who used to look down on everyone? Look at him now. Debts still haunted him. Creditors stalked him through the streets. One day, someone recorded a video of Andrew being shaken down by loan sharks, his bag ripped from his hands as they searched for a few crumpled bills. The video spread online, drawing jeers. From CFO to beggar, how fitting. Like father, like son, finally paying. I once saw him slumped on the church steps, his face unshaven, his clothes torn. When he lifted his bloodshot eyes to me, his voice cracked. "Mother, they laugh at me. I have no one left." My heart twisted, but I forced myself to answer quietly. "You're not a victim, Andrew. You chose this path, and now you must live with it." Nights grew darker for him. Grace told me he had turned to cheap liquor, his breath reeking of it when he stumbled through the streets. The man who once strutted proudly now barely resembled a human being. Then came the letters. They arrived in crumpled envelopes, the ink smudged as if blurred by tears. His handwriting was shaky, almost childlike. One letter read, "Mother, I dream of Father every night. He stands by my bed, laughing at me. I scream that I've lost everything, but he only says, 'That's the price of weakness.' I wake drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. Mother, I'm so afraid. I regret it all. I wish I had listened to you and Grace." Another was longer, more broken. "I squandered everything Father gave me not to build a future, but to waste, to boast, to prove myself. I'm drowning in debt. He covered for me, but instead of changing, I became him. I hate myself, Mother. I hate that I hurt Grace, my children, and you." Every word cut into me like glass. But I never wrote back. I knew if I answered, he would cling to me again, hiding behind excuses, never facing himself. At night, I lay awake, tears soaking my pillow, hearing his trembling voice echo in my mind. "Mother, please don't leave me. I'm scared." I loved him, but I couldn't save him. Because some lessons can only be learned when the world finally turns its back. And Andrew was learning too late. The letters weren't enough to free Andrew from his torment. Grace told me he had begun haunting the church grounds at night, sitting hunched on the steps, muttering like a man who had lost his mind. One evening, I saw him myself. He stood before the cross, the flicker of candles casting shadows across his gaunt face. When he turned, his eyes were wild with fear. He stumbled toward me and fell to his knees. "Mother, forgive me, please. I can't take it anymore. Every night Father comes back, he laughs at me, mocks me. I feel like a demon." The son who once screamed that I had betrayed the family now wept like a child at my feet. His tears soaked the hem of my dress, his hands trembling as they clutched at me. I bent down, my heart tearing apart, and placed my hand on his shoulder. My voice shook. "Andrew, I don't hate you. But forgiveness doesn't erase the past. You must seek redemption by the way you live, not by begging for mercy." He sobbed harder, his cries echoing in the silence of the church. "I don't know where to begin. Everything's gone. I only have you. If you abandon me too, how will I survive?" I looked into his eyes, bloodshot, empty, drowning. I wanted to hold him, to soothe him like I had when he was a little boy, but I knew only he could save himself now. I gently pulled his hands from my dress and whispered, "Stand up, Andrew. If you want forgiveness, show me change. Otherwise, the nightmares will never leave you." He collapsed onto the cold floor, sobbing. The sound followed me as I walked away, heavy and endless, like a bell tolling for the dead. Days later, a letter arrived, his last. The envelope was damp, the ink smeared, as if written by shaking hands in the middle of the night. "Mother, this may be the last time I write to you. I tried to change, but the darkness inside me is too heavy. Father visits me every night in my dreams. He tells me I'll never escape his shadow. And Mother, I believe him. I've become his reflection, and it's killing me. I remember when you took me to church as a child, when I was just a boy afraid of being left behind. Back then, I was innocent. But I chose the wrong path. I betrayed Grace, my children, and you. Now there is nothing left but emptiness and regret. Please forgive me. Just a little. Not so I can live again, but so I can leave this world in peace. Mother, I love you, but it's too late to prove it. May God have mercy on my soul. I clutched the letter to my chest, sobbing until my body ached. Andrew had finally seen the truth, but only when everything was already lost. And that, I realized, was the cruelest sentence of all. Not the judge's gavel, not society's scorn, but regret when there is no path left to redemption. After the storm, life slowly settled into something new. I had lost my husband, lost the image of a son I once thought would carry on our love, but I had gained something greater, the truth and a fragile but real peace. Grace and the children moved closer to me. The house, once suffocated by shadows and deceit, now echoed with laughter again. Every morning I cooked breakfast while the children's voices filled the kitchen. Grace sat across from me, her eyes glowing with a freedom she had never known before. One afternoon, as we cleaned the living room together, Grace smiled softly at me. "Mom, it's because of you that I had the courage to break free. Now I know what it feels like to live honestly." I took her hand, my throat tightening. She was no longer just a daughter-in-law. She was family, real family. I began to give more of myself to the church, to charity, to children who had no parents. Someone once asked me, "Mrs. Beatrice, after all you've endured, how do you still have the strength to give?" I smiled. Because I finally understand family isn't blood. Family is respect. Family is love. When you give that, you receive peace in return. The scars in my heart did not vanish overnight. Sometimes I still dreamed of Andrew, his hollow eyes, his trembling voice. I would wake in tears. But instead of letting grief consume me, I placed my hand on my chest and prayed, "Lord, have mercy. Let my son find light, even if it is too late." I knew life offered no rewinds, but I also knew I was free from the chains of lies. One autumn afternoon, I sat on the church garden bench, watching children run and laugh across the grass. The golden sunlight filtered through the leaves, and the bells rang softly in the breeze. For the first time in decades, my heart felt light. Grace approached, carrying a basket of red apples. She set it down and smiled. "Mom, we've made it through. Now all that's left is peace." I looked at her and felt a deep gratitude swell inside me. Without Grace, I might still be living in illusions, still worshiping a false husband, still enabling a wayward son. "Grace," I whispered, "you're not just my daughter-in-law. You are my true family." That night in my journal I wrote, "Family is not blood. Family is the ones who stand with you, defend the truth, and love you even when the world turns away." Grace showed me that. I opened a small class for orphans, teaching them letters, hearing their laughter, their soft voices saying, "Thank you." In giving, I found healing. When people asked about my past, I didn't hide. I told them everything. David's betrayal, Andrew's lies, the court battles, the fall from grace. And I always ended with this truth. Family is not about blood. Family is about respect and love. And the truth, however painful, is the only path to peace. I was no longer the trembling wife, no longer the silent mother. I was Beatrice, a woman who had walked through hell and found heaven in the truth. As I watched my grandchildren run into my arms, I realized happiness had never been about preserving a façade. Happiness was this: people who truly loved me, respected me, and stood by me. And so I whispered to myself, this story ends, but the journey of living truthfully has only just begun. A year after the trial, I stood before David's grave. The stone still bore the words, "A devoted husband, a loving father." I looked at those words and smiled sadly. He had never been either of those things, but I no longer felt hatred. I had let it go. Grace laid a bouquet of white flowers on the grave and whispered, "Mom, we don't need to hate the past. We only need to live truthfully in the present." I nodded. Her words closed a chapter. I was no longer the woman deceived, no longer the victim. I had become the storyteller, the one who could shine a light for others still trapped in lies. So I began to write. Page by page, I poured my memories into a journal, the whispers at the funeral, the letters, the court, the collapse of illusions. When I shared it with the church community, letters began to pour in. Women from faraway towns, strangers I had never met, wrote to me. I lived through the same betrayal. My husband lied for years. My son has followed his father's path. And each one said the same thing through my story. They found courage to break free. My pain, I realized, was not wasted. It had become a lantern for others. One afternoon, as my grandchildren ran into my arms, I felt the truth burn clear inside me. Happiness had never been about preserving a flawless image of family. Happiness was this: the laughter of children, the respect of those who stood by me, the freedom of honesty. I hugged them tight, smiling through tears, and whispered the words that had become my creed. Family is not blood. Family is respect. Family is love. Now, when I tell my story, I don't shy away from the pain. I end with a simple message. If you are living in lies, dare to look closely, because the truth, no matter how painful, is the only path to peace. I lift my face to the morning sun, breathing in the clean air. The scars remain, the memories ache, but my heart is finally still. This chapter is closed, but the journey of living truthfully has only just begun.